I was actually bored by Minerva. Imagine that. Bored by Athena. How dare me. And that's why I didn't want to study her till the end. But now I understand it. I understand Minerva, the cunning wisdom, the cold stare, the long-term, long-distance, militant friend and supporter, the sisterly support. Everybody wants to talk about the dying and rising gods. They want to talk about that they think everything is a harvest cycle of rituals and deities, and it's a solar sun god, and all this stuff, but it's such a train wreck. People don't actually know what they're talking about. It's crazy out there. It's crazy out there. But there is someone who knew what he was talking about, and that was J to the G, Frazer. Stanley Kubrick loved him. And people think they can dismiss this guy. Imagine that. You think you can dismiss J.G. Frazer? What? You can disagree with some of his theories. You can have your opinion, and this is what makes me sick about the people on Twitter. This is what makes me sick about the people around me. You can have your opinion, I have my opinion, but it doesn't matter because you don't matter. Now, Frazer, you can't even walk over to the ancient history section, the classical section. Here's the crazy part. You can't even walk over to the anthropology section, the psychology section, the mythology section, if you're lucky enough to have that one in your bookstore. I do. I have a great bookstore. You can't. The religion section. I mean, even philosophers are getting in on this guy. His work is everywhere. It's just, it just looms. It looms in the background. People focus on the theory, and isn't that nice for you? Because that, without reading anything or without researching anything, it's really easy to have a theory or to disagree with a theory. And I don't agree with everything he said either. He was so prolific that I just have things on my bookshelf and I'll pull them down, and I didn't even realize they were translated by him, annotated by him, introduced by him. He was actually too prolific. His publishers were constantly just saying, please stop inflating this works. You're bloating everything. Just cut it down. Just give us a couple of volumes. The Golden Bough, B-O-U-G-H, it bloated itself to 13 volumes at one point. And his publishers were finally like, this has gotta go. We gotta get this down to like 2 volumes. And even the remaining 2 volumes, this is an absolute tome. Frazer lived during one of the most important times of the research of cultures all over the globe. And what he did was, in addition to his own classical studies, translation, his own voluminous work, he collected sources from all these ethnologists, these people studying and meticulously recording these other cultures. He collected it all together. He built a network, stayed in contact with many of these people, did a little bit of traveling himself, took all that information, this is in the late early 1900s, took all the information from these ethnologists and then synthesized it with the classical ancient knowledge of Greece and Rome and other cultures, and created this giant encyclopedic body of knowledge. That's why Frazer has to be dealt with. And here's the other point. He's a good writer in English. And I have a fairly big personal library, I guess you would say at this point. It's just maybe a few hundred books, but it's very focused on my interest. I'm sorry, but these modern writers they're not good. They're dead inside. Their soul has been crushed by rationalism. And when they try to write, and they can't even find it in themselves to feel anything. I mean, even some feeling for unbelief or some sort of lost hope, there's just nothing there. It's just a cold crunching of generalized information, juggling facts. That's what a lot of these modern books are. It just is. Starting around the 50s, 60s. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And as you move through the 80s and 90s, I mean, you can just feel the dead soul. Even though Frazer did write with excellent sentences and at points a lot of feeling in the writing, he did have, I think, a bit of romantic sadness as opposed to just a romantic longing. He was looking back at a hope and a faith, Christianity, that he had lost through his studies, that he had moved away from. He had a Christian childhood. His dad and his uncle were very committed to Christianity and to the church. His uncle was one of the founding members of the Free Church of Scotland. And this was not a religious upbringing that was negative for him. He had many good times. Overall, he seemed to enjoy it. But as he grew up and with his studies and being at the university, he began to compare his own religion to this encyclopedic knowledge that I just mentioned that he had at his fingertips. And from the little that I know and have read, it seems like the conclusion he reached is, as I compare the religions, the beliefs, the mythologies of these other tribes to my own, I find that my own is no longer unique. Really the same somewhat innocent hope and longing for stability in the future and after death. The same thing that he saw these other people striving after, which he considered not real, not scientific, not rational. He then looked at himself and his own life, Christianity, and he walked away from it. And many of his writings are truly and very effectively subversive toward Christianity by using this giant wealth of knowledge to essentially show that, in his opinion, the Christian story is not unique. It's just another story. A couple of other things about Frazer that I noticed. First of all, his marital situation. 1896. Marie Lily Grove, a French widow who had come to Cambridge requesting advice on the ethnology of dance. Really? Requesting advice on the ethnology of dance. From now on, J.G. Frazer lives with her and her two growing daughters. Complains apparently of noise levels. Yeah, obviously. Wow. A French widow comes. I need some advice on the ethnology of dance. And then all of a sudden he's living with her and her two daughters who are now interrupting his work. Come on. That says something about your character right there, guy. Jeez. Another thing is that he was, to cretins like me and plebes like you, he was Sir J.G. Frazer. Sir. He was knighted. And I can't go into all of this, but if you look at people who are knighted, they generally are the good boys of the good little boys, pat on the head of the internationalist agenda of their day, and they're usually pushing something that's right in line with the propaganda of their day. And at the very least, they're not stepping out of line. And in the case of Frazer, I don't know this, I'm just speculating, but the obvious parts of the agenda that his work upheld were, first of all, there is this extremely boring and kind of cheesy social evolution theory in his work where the magic of ancient indigenous tribes is somehow looked at as something that eventually evolves into science of a sort. There may or may not be truth to that, but I don't care. It's just these anthropology theories. You just any theory that you can come up with, I can find a million reasons why it's not true. So, but at that time that he was living, the idea of this progressive social evolution was going on. So I see that buying into the agenda and earning him a sir. And I also see his undermining of traditional Christianity, and especially in the context of the awareness of global cultures and the use of other cultures to say that ours is not unique. Nevertheless, one of my most respected academics, and particularly what I like personally about him is his approach of blending the current anthropology with the ancient sources to get that bird's eye view. For the doubters of history out there, of which I am one, I'm not a total black pillar. I think history can be established. You just have to be careful. But I do understand why many of you out there who have your doubts about ancient history, some archaeologist digs up an artifact and there's a scribbling that looks like a stick figure and maybe some attempt at a map. An archaeologist will tell you that it's from this certain date, and they're definitely sure that the stick figure is this and that the map is this. And we know that if you just go to your used bookstore and you take out an archaeology book, and then take another one out from the next decade, another one out from the next decade, the theories change and they get debunked and they get overturned. However, with the way that Frazer approaches the subject, it's a lot more convincing because he's zooming out and seeing these patterns all across the globe and all over time. And he's taking advantage of the more scientific approach to observing other cultures. A lot of these modern anthropology books, I just got one, The Dawn of Everything. I mean, they're just, I'm not going to judge it in advance. I haven't read the whole thing. I just got it. I've looked through it a little bit. And this is one thing that makes me sick about Sapiens by Harari there. They're just flippant theories. That's not anything. I mean, Frazer was literally in contact with people who were boots on the ground in just dangerous, remote parts of the world, trying to do something that in that way hadn't really been done at that level of quality. Nothing is more quintessentially Frazer than his observations on the theme of the dying and rising God. He, in his encyclopedic fashion, in his synthesizing of all types of sources and all time periods and regions of the earth, put together a comparative study of this theme that can be found across various cultures, and it's very convincing and very illuminating. So how does all this tie in to the last three Olympians that I have not yet covered on this podcast? These last three Olympians fall right into the category and are indeed placed under the category in Frazer's work, in the edition that I have, of dying and rising gods. And they are a big contrast to Minerva, Athena, that we studied last time. You could almost say they're at the opposite end of the spectrum. These gods that we're considering today are much more of the old energy, the old earthbound energy of planting and sprouting, dying and rising, and with each new season of growth and life, the vibrant celebration of that life. Now, every morning when you get up from bed, you walk over to the cabinet, you get Corn Pops and multigrain Cheerios, and you put them down, and then you think about which one you're going to eat. And these two items that you're going to eat are called cereal. And I want you to know that these items come from a goddess named Ceres. Ceres cereal. She is the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of the grain and the corn. And she has a very intriguing story, somewhat sad and somewhat heroic, relating to her daughter, Proserpina.
Ceres was the goddess of the harvest. It was she who made the fields rich with grain, the trees heavy with fruit, and the world bright with flowers. The change of seasons was explained by a myth about this goddess and her beloved daughter, Proserpina. Deep within the earth, far below the green fields of Ceres and Proserpina, lived Pluto, god and king of the underworld. Pluto was a lonely king, ruling his dark kingdom without a queen. One day, Pluto rose from the underworld to search for a wife. And from the shadows, he saw Proserpina. Down to his underground kingdom, he took the frightened girl, and there he placed her upon a throne to reign forever as his queen. Helpless, Proserpina grieved over the loss of her mother and the sunlit earth above. A stranger to darkness, she feared this land of endless night, the dwelling place of the spirits of the dead. Over the earth, the heartbroken Ceres wandered, searching for a daughter she feared she would never see again. With each passing day, the girl's sorrow increased. King Pluto could do nothing to bring back her happiness. All over the world, the once green forests and fields withered and died. For in her sorrow, Ceres neglected the plants on the earth. But while the trees of the earth died, a pomegranate tree in the underworld lived and bore fruit. Proserpina did not know that whoever ate food in the underworld could never leave. Spread over the earth, and the gods of Olympus feared that Ceres would let mankind perish unless her daughter was returned to her. So Mercury, the messenger of the gods, was sent to rescue the girl. Pluto would not permit Proserpina to leave his kingdom forever, but he agreed to a compromise. Since she had eaten part of the pomegranate, she must spend part of each year as queen of the land of the dead. So it is that every year, while Proserpina is in the underworld, Ceres is sad. Everything dies, and it is winter. And springtime will not come back to the earth again until her daughter returns.
these are myths, these are gods and goddesses that have entire books written about them, some of which are on my shelf. I cannot cover all of these in one episode. That would be absurd. Instead, I'm using Frazer, since it's sort of his hallmark. I'm using his work to guide this particular episode. By way of introduction, let's hear a little bit of Frazer's excellent writing. And here's how he introduces the subject in regard to the Greeks, who would be, especially in some areas, seeing the fluctuation of the seasons. He fashioned for himself a train of gods and goddesses, of spirits and elves, out of the shifting panorama of the seasons, and followed the annual fluctuations of their fortunes, with alternate emotions of cheerfulness and dejection, of gladness and sorrow, which found their natural expression in alternate rites of rejoicing and lamentation, of revelry and mourning. Frazer sees this myth as essentially a myth of one harvest goddess with two aspects: descending into the earth in seed form at planting time, and rising out of the earth in her journey to full maturity at harvest time. And of course, all the details of the story do not make chronological or narrative sense. And this is something so many people don't seem to understand, especially on the internet. It's a myth. It's a collective vision or dream that spawns new contributions from the people and then curates which of those contributions will remain. The Volksgeist and the Zeitgeist collect, curate, and publish submissions from the group. Most submissions are rejected or ignored, but some stick and become part of a collective bestseller. I was once told that AI hallucinates. I wouldn't know, I don't really use it. But I've heard that AI hallucinates. Mythology also hallucinates. And I mentioned in the episodes on Hecate and Venus that the mythological vision is sometimes a double or triple vision, like you might have when you're intoxicated. A single goddess expands and becomes two or three goddesses, and the duplicates are then slightly distorted, pleasantly or unpleasantly, each in their own unique way. Then, later in time, the duplicates merge back into the original deity that spawned them. Frazer notes something fascinating along these lines. The ancient artistic renderings of Ceres and Proserpina are nearly identical at times and seem to be two aspects of the same celestial. The same corn kernel that is planted in the earth and several months later escapes from the ground. On a vase painting, the earth goddess is seen appropriately emerging from the ground with the horn of plenty and an infant in her uplifted arms, while Ceres and Proserpina, scarcely distinguishable from each other, stand at full height behind her, looking down at her half-buried figure. In this instructive picture, we see grouped together the principal personages in the myth of the corn. We can consider it as two, a mom and a daughter, but at other times we consider it as one, a twin goddess, in the heroic journey of the seed. Layers of myth are added to each of these separate tracks of consideration and develop their own body of art, their own corpus. Now, this is only an introduction. We're just grazing the surface. Let's quickly observe the child that the harvest goddess gave birth to by Zeus. A child who would go on to receive the title bursting, as in bursting blossoms. And here's how Proserpina conceived the bursting baby who would grow up to be flowery Dionysus, Dionysus of the tree. Quote, Zeus, in the form of a serpent, visited Proserpina, and she bore him Dionysus, a horned infant. Scarcely was he born when the babe mounts the throne of his father Zeus and mimicked the great god by brandishing the lightning in his tiny hand. But he did not occupy the throne long, for the treacherous Titans, their faces whitened with chalk, attacked him with knives while he was looking at himself in a mirror. For a time he evades their assaults by turning himself into various shapes, assuming the likeness successively of Zeus and Kronos, of a young man, a lion, a horse, and a serpent. Finally, in the form of a bull, he was cut to pieces by the murderous knives of his enemies. According to one version, which represented Dionysus as a son of Zeus and Ceres, his mother pieced together his mangled limbs and made him young again. Even in that tiny description, there is an absurd amount of symbology and parallels, particularly this idea of mom piecing together the mangled body and making him young again. And like we say on this podcast, in which Frazer himself said, ritual feeds myth and myth feeds ritual. Quote, all that he had done or suffered, Dionysus, in his last moments was enacted before the eyes of the worshippers, who tore a live bull to pieces with their teeth and roamed the woods with frantic shouts. In front of them was carried a casket supposed to contain the sacred heart of Dionysus. And to the wild music of flutes and cymbals, they mimicked the rattles by which the infant god had been lured to his doom. Where the resurrection formed part of the myth, it also was acted at the rites. Unquote. So the dying and rising ladies of the harvest gave birth to a son that was too lively for his own good. And he was destroyed only to be pieced together and brought back to life. If we take Frazer, it's not surprising that he saw in this myth his own lost Christian faith, particularly because around these myths there developed mystery cults which began to form an idea of a belief in eternal life. Finding hope in the power of nature that they reflected on year by year, they thought that it wasn't too great of a leap to think that that reviving power could be made theirs and bring them back to life. And here is a quote by Frazer that comments on that, but also reveals his sad, romantic longing for, I think, the more innocent days of his Christian childhood. Dying men grasp at straws. The reasoning that satisfied St. Paul and has brought comfort to untold thousands of sorrowing Christians standing by the deathbed or the open grave of their loved ones was good enough to pass muster with the ancient pagans, when they too bowed their heads under the burden of grief, and with the taper of life burning low in the socket, looked forward into the darkness of the unknown. Endless books piled to the sky have been written on these three dying and rising characters. They reach all the way back in one direction to early observations of nature's dying and reemerging each year, and the suspenseful wait in the meantime. They reach forward to beliefs and rituals of a dying and rising God who creates the possibility of a renewed human life after death for his initiated. Since Frazer, many alternate interpretations have been offered for these myths and the way that they might relate to religion, literature, psychology, etc. Either way, Frazer's personality and work are forever stamped on this subject, and Ceres, Proserpina, and Dionysus are certainly everywhere in mythology and art, and will be part of our body of research going forward.